welcome to Walking on the Weene Side. Today we're having a very special edition of Walking on the Weene Side with our very good friend, Barry Alexander Brown. And he is, of course, the last time we spoke to him, he was in Cannes for the film festival. And now he's still in France. And he's sitting on the beach. And I'm drooling here in Arizona, wishing I were on the beach with him.
Yeah, I'll show you. Yeah.
Oh yes.
It's more of a harbor, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, there is a beach there. But there is a beach right here.
Yes, and obviously, being in France is a good place to eat. Everywhere in France, there's a good place to eat.
Yeah, pretty much everywhere is a very good place to eat. Sure.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about a film that actually has a history. It goes back. It was made originally in the late 60s, as I recall.
Well, actually, it was made in the late 70s.
70s. Okay.
Yeah, but it was about the 60s.
Yeah. Okay. And it is about the Vietnam War and the protests against the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And so your goal right now is to raise some money to have this reissued in a new format. Could you explain that a little?
Yeah, that's right. Because last fall we raised money in order to get it remastered from its original 16 millimeter film format to a 4K, what they call a DCP. And DCP is a system by which almost all theaters in America now project films. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of new interest in the movie, and to try and redistribute it in film was impossible. I mean, just nobody could play it. And so even though we had 35 millimeter prints and even 60 millimeter prints, there was just no way that we could redistribute the film. So we raised enough money last fall to go through a whole new restoration of the film, which really means going back and creating a 4K version of it. But the 4K version also, actually, it was really for the very, very first time we were able to color correct the film in a way that has a certain kind of intricacy that really didn't exist 39 years ago when we finished the movie. Also, we were very, very young. Glenn Silver and I were very young, and it was our first film, and we knew very little about any of the process. So the fact that we even got finished was sort of amazing. And now, nearly 40 years later, there is all this new interest in the movie, and we were able to create a new version, which is, in fact, a better-looking version than you would have seen in 1979 and 1980 when it was distributed in America.
Mm-hmm. So what is the current goal of the current fundraiser?
Well, the current fundraising is to really help with the re-release of the film. We're re-releasing it with somebody who will be booking it around the country. Uh-huh. And we do have a publicist on, a great publicist. And it's a matter of now paying for the publicity to get the film noticed again. Right. And going to be able to go into each one of these cities and create enough interest for people then to come out and see it. For any movie, especially nowadays, 50% of your costs is really promotion of the movie. In this case, we made the movie, so it's not 50%. It's actually all the costs we have to get the film out. Right. Is really what we're raising right now. We're not trying to raise a lot of money. We're really trying to raise a very modest amount, which is $25,000. We have into our third day of our Kickstarter campaign. We're doing very well. A lot of people have shown up already. We're slightly less. We're about 30% into raising that money. I'm really confident we're going to, but we really do need people to show up and go on and contribute.
Well, I've already contributed.
We do already have a date in a cinema in New York, and that's really going to be the beginning of our re-release,
Right.
which is late September at the Metrograph in Manhattan. And we're really hoping that this will be a great kickoff and give this film a whole new life.
Why is this film important today? I mean, we are talking almost 40 years ago. Why is this film, do you think, why does it speak to today? I've seen the film, so I have my own ideas.
Great question. You know, we are in a new period of social activism. You know, you see what happened in Parkland with those students. You see a great deal of activity with sort of a new women's movement. You see a lot of activity with immigrants. This is a movie that speaks right to that, which is the war at home is about the anti-Vietnam War movement. And what we did was we followed that movement in one town, Madison, Wisconsin. The film really begins in 1963, when the very first protest against the war happened in Madison in November of 1963, really only days before the assassination of President Kennedy, as well as the assassination of Nguyen Dinh Diem, who was the president of South Vietnam at that moment. But the remarkable thing about the movie is that we had all this incredible footage from Madison throughout that decade. And the reason we had it was because there was this one truly great newsman in Madison, a guy named Blake Kellogg, who was the news director of one of the local stations. And he really saw that they were capturing something remarkable. And he kept all of this footage. And then in the early 70s, when he left that station, he turned all that footage over to the Wisconsin Historical Society, which is right in Madison. Mm-hmm. And with the idea that at some point, somebody's going to come along and discover this
archive
treasure, this amazing treasure. And a few years later, it was Glenn Silburn and myself who went into that archive and started digging through it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was really digging, because at that moment in time, it was these boxes and boxes and boxes, many of them really not labeled. And so we had to dig into an entire decade. And it wasn't as if all of the protest footage was clearly marked. So we had to go through everything, which was a lot of house fires, a lot of traffic accidents, a lot of bake sales, mm-hmm. a lot of all the things that local news covers. And in many ways, that was pretty interesting for me, because it's an incredible look back.
Yes, you can. It also grounds you in.
And I was able to look back on that town. Of course, in the movie, what you see is the protests, because that's what we and that's what we.
That was your focus.
And so, going back to answering that original question, I think that people who are active and politically active today really want to see how a movement like that happened. Mm-hmm. And you can see this in the war at home. We chose Madison because it was an incredible example of how a movement grows from very, very small to this this incident leads to that incident, leads to that incident, leads to that incident. I think that the clip that we sent you is about the Dow demonstration, which in Madison was the turning point for that movement.
Yeah,
It was the point in which
we're going
a
to be
lot of
seeing
people
that
got
in a
beaten up.
moment. We're going to see that clip in a moment. So,
Yeah.
folks, you stay tuned for that. But I just want to just say one quick thing about what you were saying, which is you mentioned looking at all this other stuff like the bake sales and and these little things. And I think the neat thing about that was it probably kept you guys grounded more, so you really could see the connection
Yeah,
between the community and what was going on.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Now, folks, we'll be right back, but we want you to see this powerful, I think, segment. It's a few minutes long and well worth watching. Is from The War at Home.
As it turned out, here in 1967, Dow was accused not only by students here at Wisconsin, but by students practically across the country of manufacturing napalm. And a napalm bomb, when it shatters on impact, is supposed to severely burn, destroy whatever comes in contact with it. Dow Chemical is a big corporation here. And Dow Chemical recruited chemical engineers and other professional people from the campus for careers in their various operations.
It was clear that the university was going to protect Dow. There was a lot of talk about free speech. People were free speech for the recruiters, free speech for capitalists to make money, free speech for people to kill people. The climate on campus was to really do a job on Dow the next day. So the plan was that people were going to go up to the Commerce Building again and sit down and be carried off. There's another nonviolent demonstration.
People at that time's consciousness about the war was at a stage of conscious, active resistance. There was a straight determination to resist being removed from that building if the police entered.
In following procedures that we had gone through before, I simply called the chief downtown and indicated that I needed some more help on the campus, and he said he'd provide the help and would come to the campus himself, which is exactly what he did.
I was in the building at Dow too, standing right by the door when the head of the campus police comes in and announces, everybody, you have 1 minute or something like that to evacuate the building. And without even another word, in come 35 policemen.
To this day, it's debatable as to what happened when the police made their first move into the building. But once they made that first move, regardless of what happened there, all they did was come in 4 or 5 at a time with clubs swinging and just beat the hell out of everybody in their path as they just swept down the corridor.
Everybody sort of then just ran for it.
At one moment, the police appear at the front of the corridor swinging, and it seemed to me it was like 10, maybe 5 seconds. Suddenly, I was in the front of the group. Just everybody in front of me disappeared. I don't know where those people went. They couldn't have gone into the walls. That's how fast they moved down that corridor. And people in the rear were trying to go out the back door, not panicking, but there just wasn't time to get everybody behind us out. And that's when they started swinging us. And I had a heavy lambskin jacket, which I pulled up over my head.
The cops were chasing people. One guy got chased into the bathroom. Soglin was on the floor in the corner of the hall. There were 3 cops around him, and they were just pounding the crap out of him. And he was all curled up in a ball, and he had a leather jacket on. And I can clearly remember the sound of those clubs hitting that leather.
So after this initial impact here, it was a relatively short period of time when we were able to accomplish the objective of clearing the corridor area. As a matter of fact, it took 12 minutes. But the problem then transferred itself from within the building to outside of the building.
The whole place was like a war zone. The tear gas was going off at that point, and that was what the critical moment was. Crowd began to gather because classes were just over when the cops moved in. And so suddenly, with the crowd getting larger and the crowd getting meaner, they start using the tear gas. And suddenly, like 4,000, 5,000 kids who are being affected by this thing. Well, suddenly, all these fine middle-class kids at the University of Wisconsin are being tear gassed and clubbed. And I mean, I don't know if it's a time shock or what, but there was an awful lot of politicalization that took place in that 15, 20 minutes when the cops just let go with everything they had. And that night, something called a strike began.
A general strike.
Welcome back to Walking on the Weene Side. So, Barry, one of the things that strikes me about the movie and its relevance to now is it really is about people trying to speak truth to power and the response of power to people trying to speak truth.
Right.
What's your take on what the lesson that people might want to think about there?
Well, definitely. I mean, at that moment in time, in the 60s, at the beginning of this anti-Vietnam War movement, the war was still very well supported, and I don't know if you can say popular, but certainly popular enough that the American people thought this is where we should be and this is what we should do. Mm-hmm. The protesters in Madison came up with a completely different point of view based upon their own research. And the government didn't want to hear it. You saw there's a point in which Hubert Humphrey comes to Madison and he says, basically, we're going to put these signs in the Hall of Shame. So what you said about speaking truth to power, the power was people like Hubert Humphrey, Lyndon Johnson, people who were pushing this war and pushing it to be bigger and bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in the long run, this was an enormous mistake that I don't know if everybody agrees with, but certainly if you look back, America had to sign a peace agreement, which was the right thing to do, and then vacate Vietnam. At that moment in time, the government was warning, and so many people who were against the anti-Vietnam War movement was warning, this is going to lead to a bloodbath. Well, Vietnam is actually, at this point, a pretty good friend of America.
Yeah.
We buy a lot of things from America, from Vietnam, and it was never a bloodbath. The bloodbath was the war itself. But as I think you said to me, the anti-Vietnam War movement went into a direction in which it splintered, in which it lost its direction.
And sometimes got even violent. The war against the war became
certainly did, and even in Madison, where the Army Math Research Center was blown up, and in which a researcher working in that building at the wee hours of the morning, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, was killed when a wall fell on them. there was certainly an act of frustration, and many people thought that the Army Math Research Center should be blown up. It should have been blown up years before, but it did lead to somebody's death, which caused a trauma in the movement in Madison at that moment in time. But even beyond that, even without that, there was a splintering of the movement, and at a point where it had its biggest influence and its most power, and because it splintered so badly into so many different factions that it simply dissipated. It's a thing that is necessary to look at these past movements and see this sort of thing, to understand that this can happen. It does happen over and over and over. Doris Lessing, the great novelist, wrote a series of books about a character named Martha Quest, set in Rhodesia during World War II. And it's basically the same sort of very tiny, in that case, a very, very tiny political movement. But so many of the issues are the same, and it's a great case study for what happens that can happen in movements like this. I don't know whether or not the movements that are happening right now will go through this sort of thing. I hope not. I hope when they rise to the zenith of power, that they will accomplish great things rather than fall apart.
And hopefully the people who are in power will listen more ably than the people who are willing to listen to the anti-war movement.
Well, some people in the power will not listen here.
No.
You got to push and push and push and push and push, and that's always been the case.
Yeah.
And this is the case. And this is really, really one of the lessons that you get from the war at home is that they're not going to listen there right away. They're not going to give up their position. You're going to have to push and push and push. Mm-hmm. And if you're right, then you're right, and you got to stand up for what's right. Mm-hmm. Certainly, ending the war in Vietnam was the right thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, we
should have and getting us out of there and stopping really that bloodbath that was going on.
I don't know if you know this about It Matters Radio, but we, quite a while back when we were just doing audio, we had a guest on, a fellow named Bertie Mac. Now, Bernie
Mac?
Yeah.
The comedian?
Huh? No. Bertie worked for Kennedy in the White House.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. And he was sent to Vietnam by Kennedy and came back and told Kennedy, this is a disaster in the making.
Yeah.
And Kennedy was planning to pull out.
Yeah.
According to Bertie. So
yeah.
Just
I think that's true. So my father was in the Air Force during the Vietnam War. He'd been in the Air Force during World War II and during Korea. And his friends were coming back and saying to him, he said, you've got sons, don't let them go to Vietnam. Don't let them go. Mm-hmm. Don't let them die in that mud. We have no idea why we're there. This is his friends. Mm-hmm. His friends who were in the Air Force. Mm-hmm. His friends who had fought in World War II, but had fought in Korea. Mm-hmm. And so my brother's older, and he was eligible for the draft in the late 60s. And my father gave him a choice. He said, listen, you can get drafted, or you can join the Air Force. And my friends and I will set you on a path that you don't end up in Vietnam. And my brother chose that, and he went into the Air Force, and he didn't go to Vietnam. And I think that there was a lot of people in the military that was secretly doing that.
Oh, I know it.
And because they didn't know why we were there. Mm-hmm. and certainly there was a lot of young vets who got out of Vietnam who then joined the anti-Vietnam
Oh
War
yeah.
movement, and oftentimes led the protests.
Well, we've
In the late 60s
we've
and early
had
70s.
one of them on the show too, a Hispanic fellow from out in California who wrote a memoir. I off the top of my head I don't remember his name, but he talking about his experience, which is according to the book pretty awful. And I have a very dear friend from back east who I helped deal with his PTSD for years because and what he went through. And it really was so destructive. It was destructive to the morale of our country. It was certainly destructive to so many young men and women who served there, and of course to the families of those who served there and didn't survive. It was a horror show. As to why we got into it, well, that's a whole fascinating story in itself about the Dulles era in foreign policy, and why did we force the French to go there? And it was so. Someday, maybe you and I can chat about the Harriman Doctrine and what it did to America.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
But today, let's tell people how they can contribute to helping to get The War at Home released.
Well, The War at Home has a Kickstarter campaign right now. You can go onto Kickstarter and search The War at Home and or The War at Home Restoration, and it will come up. It will lead you right to the site, and you'll be able to contribute. It starts at $10 and goes way up. So anything that anybody can give would be great. Really, anything. We want the support, and you do a Kickstarter certainly to raise the money, but you also do the Kickstarter to raise awareness that the film is going out there.
It is itself publicity. The Kickstarter is itself publicity.
It successfully is.
Which brings up something, folks. When you do donate, and I hope you will, even if all you can donate is $10, because this is important, but then they will have the opportunity to share the fact you've donated on Facebook and on Twitter. And that's actually every bit as important because that will hopefully get other people to know about this film. Now, Barry, he's not as old as I am. I'm an old codger. But, and we look back on that and it's part of our personal history. Whereas many of you listening, you may not even have been born when these events transpired or even when the movie was released. But the thing is, as Barry has been saying, it's relevant because it is so central to how we change our nation. And one of the things you have to remember about the anti-Vietnam War protests is that ultimately they help force the government to change. It absolutely derailed the Democratic Party. And then, after it did that, it kind of gave the impetus for Nixon and Kissinger to get us out eventually, after a lot more horrible bloodshed.
After going into Cambodia and Laos, and expanding the war, real horrible. But I think, listen, I think it changed. I think it changed the country. I think it changed the awareness of how to push back. And even though there's all kinds of things that have happened in the meantime over this last half century, still a lot of the things that the progressive actions that have happened in this country really came out of the 60s. And out of that movement and out of the civil rights movement. And so I don't think that even we would have the movements that we have right now if it weren't for the fact that, you know, there was students and other people, vets, all kinds of people that took to the streets and protested and constantly protested and pushed back year in and year out and year in and year out. This wasn't the anti-Vietnam War movement didn't happen over one season. This happened over 10 years. And they kept pushing and pushing and pushing until finally the U.S. was out of Vietnam. I mean, if you look at some of the wars that we're in right now, like Afghanistan, how long have we been in Afghanistan? How much longer will we be there? Could be quite some time.
Yeah. We'll be right back, folks, to continue this discussion with Barry Brown.
The song you're about to hear was written by a 19-year-old boy. That's nothing new these days, particularly since this song is something special. It has an awful lot of important things to say about how we grown-ups are running the world. It was recorded a few weeks ago by Barry McGuire. It's now #1 in the country today, which proves that a song can still be popular and yet have something to say. Barry McGuire and Eve of Destruction.
Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. They're old enough to kill, but not for voting. It don't believe in war, but once that gun gets holding, and even the Georgia River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Yeah. Don't you understand what I'm trying to say? Can't you feel the fears I'm feeling today? If the button is pushed, there's no running away. There'll be no one to save with the world in a grave. Take a look around you, boy. It's bound to scare you, boy. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. My blood's so mad, feels like coagulating. I'm sitting here just contemplating. I can't twist the truth, it knows no regulation. And a handful of senators don't pass legislation. And marches alone can't bring integration. When human respect is disintegrating, this whole crazy world is just too frustrating. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. I think of all the hate there is in Red China. Take a look around to Selma, Alabama. You may leave here for 4 days in space, but when you return, it's the same old place. The pounding of the drums, the pride and disgrace. You can bury your dead, but don't leave a trace. Hate your next door neighbor, but don't forget to say grace. And tell me over and over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. No, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Welcome back, folks, to Walking on the Weene Side. Barry, you were just saying before the break how modern events, how the Vietnam War and the protests and that impetus has helped change America in many ways. And I just wanted to mention, one of my great heroes of that period was a guy who I first actually sort of met, in a group, a fellow named Cassius Clay.
Oh yeah.
And he was training up in Boston, my hometown, Boston,
Right.
to go up and fight a guy named Sonny Liston. And
very famous fight.
yeah, and the world was telling us that, Clay's a big mouth, no ability, and it was very much a racist kind of attack on him. And
Right.
they were making Liston the Great White Hope, and of course, Cassius destroyed Liston. But more important in history is Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali, one of the great heavyweight fighters of all time. He also was part of the protest against the Vietnam War. Of course, not in Madison, Wisconsin. This is in the border protest. And he, in doing that, in taking that stand, I think he was really the first, in my memory, first public figure from the arts and sports and things who really stood out as taking a political stand. And I think that's one of the changes that has gone on now. Now, we're not surprised when a movie person or a musician or whatever gets up at the Tonys and, hey, this is wrong.
Right. Very good point. Absolutely. Yeah, no. Muhammad Ali, he refused to serve. He refused to serve in the army to go to Vietnam. Even Martin Luther King Jr. had come out against the war, and there was a handful of other celebrities, Marlon Brando, Paul Newman, who came out. But Muhammad Ali had a lot to lose, and he really did stand up and took a lot of heat for refusing to go and serve in the army, refusing to fight in Vietnam.
All of which changed your profession.
And he was a huge influence on so many people, who then young people, who then felt that maybe they had to take another look, because like so many wars, the government said we got to fight it, and most people line up and say, "Yeah, I guess so." And certainly that's what happened at the beginning of Vietnam, the Vietnam War. People went along, and it took a long time to shift the popular opinion of that war.
And Ali was part of that shifting. Now that changed, though, something more within your profession, I think. That as that idea that people speaking out, like Ali and like King and like Brando, and that it became a more popular thing. Another thing that changed was the people went back and started relooking at the people who had been blackballed, the QAC and that stuff in the motion picture industry.
Absolutely. Because I remember my father saying to us, at that time, even though I was pretty young, saying to us about that moment in time, because don't sign anything, don't join anything, because he saw what happened from people joining certain movements during World War II, movements to support Russia. That was our ally at the time, and then 10, 15 years later, it came back, and you were blacklisted for supporting the Soviet Union during World War II, our ally. And so there was a lot of people. You're right. In the 60s, there were a lot of people that were afraid. They were afraid that this was going to be a repeat of what had happened in the 30s and 40s.
And then the mood changed. And I remember this wonderful. I went to see, my wife and I went to see Johnny Got His Gun. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, Dalton Trumbo.
That's where I was going. And of course, he was one of the blacklisted, and he had written a whole bunch of movies under other names. And we went to see it, and it was one of the first times that his name was actually put up on the screen.
That's right.
And
that must have been what, about 69, something like that.
Oh, I think a little later than that, in the 70s, early 70s. I think.
Oh, really? 71, 72, 73. Okay,
so,
but nothing later.
And I remember, you know, I mean, we were all just, oh my God, kind of a movie. It's a very powerful anti-war movie, folks. If you haven't seen Johnny Got His Gun, you can get it, I'm pretty sure, on Netflix or something. I'll watch it. Well, anyway, we were all sitting there. Our mouths open, you know, and nobody got up. The credits are rolling, and nobody got up. We're just sitting there until it gets to where it's written by Doc. And we all stood up and applauded.
That's great.
That was a real moment for me where I realized, you know, people who take a stand, they may pay a price, but down the road, hopefully history will recognize what they've accomplished.
Yeah. Often, that's exactly what happens. We look back at history and you know, the villains and the heroes are usually pretty clear. Not always, but pretty clear.
Mm-hmm. So, the war at home is part of that history. It is part of that recognition of the need for us, people like us, people listening to the show, people like my guest, Barry Brown, people like Ken Weene, to speak truth to power. And you can help remind us of not only of that part of the history, but remind us as a nation of that responsibility by kicking in a little bit. So go to
Kickstarter. Yes.
Go to Kickstarter.
We're all in this together. We sink or we swim together.
Yeah. So go to Kickstarter, make a contribution, a small one, a big one if you can, but something to getting the war at home re-released, and then make sure that you mention it. You know, put it up on Facebook, put it up on Twitter, tell people.
Yes.
And I don't know, Barry, I don't know if there's any way people can, like, I live in Tucson, Arizona. We have a very nice artsy movie theater here, you know, called The Loft. It does movies like this.
Right.
And I don't know if any of you, but when the movie is released, if you go to those movie theaters like that and say, hey, you know, this is out there, let's get it.
Great idea.
That would help
it's a
too.
great idea. Yeah. Let us know. I mean, I think that even you know, with this Kickstarter campaign, there's a comment that you can put in if you make any kind of donation,
Mm-hmm.
and you can say, I have a local theater that I think would love to have this movie. Do that comment. That would be incredibly helpful, and there might be theaters that we are ignoring that we don't even know about.
Mm-hmm.
That would be wonderful to have this film at.
And then, of course, one last thing, folks. When you hear it on Facebook, when you see it, and of course, when it happens, we're going to make a special mention of it on Matters Radio, too. But when the film is finally out there and you can get to see it, go. Buy the ticket. You know, sit there. Buy some popcorn, yes, by all means. But, you know, I found that movie is so powerful, you may end up with half your popcorn kind of that you missed your mouth. It's
a good movie. I mean, it's not, you know, it keeps your interest. It grabs your interest right from the beginning, and it keeps your interest because we have such a wonderful and amazing story to tell. And we were lucky enough to tell it, and I think we told it well. I mean, after nearly 40 years, this film still resonates and still has power. And it's a great source for people who want to get politically involved and get out there and do something. And it's a great example that what you do can have an effect, can change the world.
Barry, thank you once more for joining me on Walking on the Weene Side, and thank you for making films that matter.
Thank you, Ken.